Early morning for you, I'm sure, Andrea.
It is. Yes, I am feeling awake right now, but if you see me nodding off, just shout really loudly and I'll wake up. Good afternoon. Welcome to those who are joining. We'll just give it another few seconds and we'll begin. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Great. So can I get a thumbs up or a verbal yes if you can see my screen? Yes. Okay, great. Well, once again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Development Gateway side event. And the title of this session is Break Through the Data Blockers, How to Use Tobacco Control Evidence More Effectively. So this is, we're going to be talking a lot about some of our findings of our program. And I did want to say a quick technical note. So we have designed this session to be as interactive as possible. So although we do have kind of a few slides for you, a little after halfway through, we're actually going to move into breakout groups. So in order for you to be assigned to a breakout group, I would strongly encourage you that you join using the Zoom link rather than the Whova app. And the reason for that is because, you will be moved into a breakout group. So if you're connected via Zoom right now, you should be fine. And, we have facilitators on hand who are happy to answer any technical questions as we get to this point. But just a heads up, we are hoping that you'll be able to speak and discuss. So when that time comes about halfway through our session, if you can move to a place that, doesn't have a lot of ambient noise, that would be great, because then we'll be able to all hear each other. So with that technical note aside, I'll go ahead and jump into the agenda for today. So I will be walking you through very briefly introductions of the facilitators who will be helping facilitate the session. I will then give an introduction to DG and the TCDI program. I know some of you, this material might be familiar. For others, this is all new. We'll then move into Rachel Cotonio-Davatsu, who will be giving us a review of the country tobacco control priorities that we've seen, as well as the tobacco control challenges. And what's really exciting is that we've done a series of country assessments, but this is really the first time where we are publicly sharing in aggregate what those results are. So you're at the world premiere, everyone, of this information being released. So I hope you'll find it interesting. And from that, again, as I mentioned, about 25 minutes in, 30 minutes in, we'll move into breakout sessions where you'll have a good amount of time to speak and to process and share your own kind of context and challenges and ways to move through that. And then finally, we'll close up with a conclusion. So if there's any questions about, this session, feel free to enter it into the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to move us into participant introductions. So the 5 faces you see on the screen are your 5 facilitators for this hour. My name is Andrea Ulrich. I am the Deputy Director of Operations at Development Gateway. But more importantly, for this session, I am the Program Manager of our tobacco control program called the Tobacco Control Data Initiative. So I'll pass the mic to Rachel, and then if others can jump in with your name, your role in the program, and if you don't mind, your location. By the way, I'm based in Houston in the United States at the moment.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel. I'm based in Nairobi. I'm a Senior Tobacco Control Advisor with DG and also in charge of DG's work, TCDI's work in Kenya. Aminata.
Hi everyone, my name is Aminata Kamara. I'm based in Dakar, Senegal. I'm the West Africa coordinator of TCDI. Sembe, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Sembe and I am based in Abuja, Nigeria, and I support Aminata and the rest of the team with project implementation in Nigeria. So I'm the country lead for Nigeria. Kelly?
Hi, I'm Dr. Kelly Sams. I am a senior associate with Development Gateway, and I'm a researcher in medical anthropology and public health, and I am based in Gainesville, Florida.
Wonderful. So that's the team that's with you today. If you wouldn't mind, for those of you calling in, if you can write in the chat, just your name, your organization and your location, that'll be great. And that'll help us kind of understand where we're based and our context. So if you don't mind typing that in while we move forward, that would be excellent. In the meantime, I will be giving a brief overview of Development Gateway as well as the TCDI program. So what is Development Gateway? We are a nonprofit organization that primarily focuses on data for development. DG has 2 decades of experience in more than 70 countries. 28 of those were in sub-Saharan Africa. And our mission, we envision a world in which institutions listen and respond to the needs of their constituents, are accountable, and are efficient in targeting and delivering services that improve lives. And our vision is we support the use of data, technology, and evidence to create more effective, open, and engaging institutions. So just a little bit of background. We started from a place where our a technology company at its base. So we came into being by developing a software program called the Aid Management Platform. And we operated in the way that many tech companies operate, which is, hey, we can build technically this great product. Let's get it to as many people as possible. As we've grown as an organization, our understanding of the theory of change and our kind of priorities have shifted. And instead of this idea of, if you build it, they will come, we've shifted much more to an understanding of data use and having data use be at the center of what we do and what we build. So that's what you see here in this graphic in the middle, the idea that we need useful data to exist, that we need skills and tools available to analyze that data. We need authorization and incentives to analyze data, as well as feedback on data availability and data quality. So all those need to be present in order to have someone be able to do something differently, right? Make a decision based on that data. So this is a self-reinforcing cycle. And as you can see, it also plays into the need to understand the broader context in which data is used. So what do? We conduct studies around how data and technology can inform decision-making. We also build technology that helps governments, civil society, academics, and others collect and analyze information and strengthen their capability to use data. So I'll just zoom by these, but these are just past projects that we've done that visualize different kinds of data that allow you to filter. This project, for example, aggregates information on financial aid and allows you to kind of analyze or filter by region, by program. And we've also developed a Tanzania health dashboard that allows you to see geotagged information about facilities and to get facility level data. So that's kind of our past in terms of how we approach different projects and how we can build different websites. And that leads us to the Tobacco Control Data Initiative. So we are all, I'm speaking to the choir here, but just a brief slide on why we're doing this work. As many of you know and can recite this likely by heart, tobacco products, when used as directed, will kill half of all users. More than 8 million users will die each year globally from tobacco. For every person who dies because of smoking, at least 30 people live with a serious smoking-related illness. And we know that smoking causes cancer, heart disease, stroke, lung disease, diabetes, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other conditions as well. So the Tobacco Control Data Initiative is a program funded by the Gates Foundation. It is led by Development Gateway and the University of Cape Town. And I know we have some members from UCT who are on the call. And TCDI works in coordination with government, civil society, and academia to consolidate available tobacco control data and resources, identify and fill gaps in the available data, and create a one-stop shop for policymakers and others to access the relevant tobacco control data they need to pass and monitor tobacco control legislation. So essentially there's these two prongs, right? There's aggregating available information and research, and then of course, funding primary data collection. So this is our program methodology, and this is important, especially, to keep in mind as, I've passed the mic to Rachel for her to discuss our findings. But to give background on how we went about it, we first start with an assessment. So that's a series of interviews. We aim for around 20 to 25 interviews for a full assessment in a given country. And we look at a cross section, right? So we interview members of government, academia, civil society. We try as well to get a mix of government ministries represented. So in certain cases, we've been able to talk to the ministries of finance, ministries of trade, kind of actors who might not be considered as traditional tobacco control actors, but to get their understanding and to get their priorities. And then we present these findings of the assessment in a validation workshop where we kind of reflect back what we've heard, and we ask, do these priorities that we've heard in the interviews reflect, your tobacco control priorities in this country? And we also confirm the area of primary data collection that we will fund for that country. So that all happens in a validation workshop. And I think some of you have been on those workshops and participated, so you're very familiar. And from there, we move to tool development. So we have an in-house software development team. They build the websites. They're the ones who are looking at kind of the website structure, the API, and they're making sure that we're able to build a website that is responsive, flexible, and can be updated over time. We then move into primary data collection, where we will be, working on collecting data that we had decided on in the workshop, as well as continue to scan for new research, when we hear inputs about new reports that are coming out that are of interest, and then we work on updating the site with that information. So the idea is that this website continues to be a live website, right? So updates continue to occur. So I hope that gives you a helpful overview of the program and the methodology and the ideas behind the work. And I'll now pass it to Rachel to discuss the tobacco control priorities that we've heard.
Sorry, just trying to figure out where to get the controls from.
Oh, I can share my screen, Rachel, unless you...
Please go ahead and continue sharing. Okay. So through the 4 countries that we've done the assessment in, this is a summary of the tobacco control priorities. So basically during the assessment, we were trying to identify 4 things. So 1, what are their priorities? This could be priorities in terms of advocacy, in terms of policy development. Then we'll try to identify what are their data needs? So what information do they need to achieve their tobacco control objectives that they feel they currently don't have? And then we would ask them, what are the challenges they're facing? And these challenges could be data related or could be other challenges just in implementation. So on this slide, we've summarized the priorities from 3 countries, being Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. And the first priority was enforcement of tobacco control laws. So Nigeria and Ethiopia have new tobacco control laws or regulations that have just come into force. And so the major priority there then is how these can be enforced. Equally, Kenya has some regulations that came in 2019. And so the areas they felt that were currently not being enforced was smoke-free, graphic health warnings, and sales to minors. The second thing that came up was alternative livelihoods for tobacco farmers. So in all these three countries, there are varying numbers of tobacco farmers. I think Kenya, out of all of them, has the most numbers. And the questions were things like, how many farmers do we have? Are there alternative crops identified for these farmers? What's the impact of farming on the farmers in terms of health impacts? How important is this to our country? Because very often it's a tobacco industry argument that tobacco control will affect farming or will affect revenues. Then the third issue was tobacco industry interference. And in all countries, it was noted the tobacco industry is interfering with policy. And so people wanted to know who's the tobacco industry in our country, what are the tactics that they're using, and so on. Another one was awareness raising on harms of tobacco use. And many people felt that there's not enough public education campaigns going on in African countries. The raising of tobacco taxes and whether the current rates of tobacco tax meet the WHO threshold. The control of illicit trade in all our countries. And then in Kenya and Nigeria, there was the issue of capacity building for government agencies and civil society. The issue of novel tobacco products, and there was a very wide range here because novel, I guess, is novel depending on which country you are in. And so products like smokeless, e-cigarettes, shisha. And so there were questions around what products are in our country, are they regulated? How do we know whether they are safe? And then the issue of shisha use came up in Ethiopia and Nigeria. Political will from policymakers and enforcers. The issues around the health burden of tobacco use, so both health and economic. Issues around funding for tobacco control, provision of cessation services, and improving government surveillance, monitoring, and evaluation systems. Next one, please, Andrea. Next one, please. So when we then ask them, what kind of data do you need to help you achieve your tobacco control objectives, which could either be implementation of policy or adoption of fresh laws? These were the top topics that came up where people felt they did not have enough information. So the first there is prevalence of illicit tobacco trade. And the legend there shows you how many participants in each country raised that as an issue. So they are not meant to add up because somebody could have multiple issues when we ask them. And so illicit trade seems to be the trending topic. There's not enough information on illicit trade. And the second was industry interference. And so though everybody agreed that the industry is interfering, very often they don't document it. So they don't come out and announce, hey, this is us and we managed to stop your policy. So we all know they're interfering, but where is it documented? How do we quantify what they're doing, how they're doing it? And so just the need to be able to get more information that you could, I guess, not really take to court, but that you could bank, if you could call it that way. And then prevalence of tobacco use. Taxation and the impact of the changing taxes. So many of us celebrate when we get a tax increase, but very few are monitoring. Has that tax increase resulted in an increase in price? And then going even deeper, is it resulting in reduced smoking? And so who is doing these studies? How do we get this information so that then we can continue lobbying for the tax increases? Around tobacco agriculture or tobacco farming, there are questions around the number of farmers, the impact this is having, around the economic and health cost of tobacco. So questions around how many people die in our country each year, how much does this cost our government, what is the cost of inaction, how much is being spent on medical treatment and issues like that. The enforcement of existing laws. Again, there's not much monitoring going on once a law is passed at levels of compliance. Both within the public and what government is doing to ensure compliance. Issues around smokeless tobacco in terms of what is the prevalence and how serious an issue it is. And so for many countries, we all have figures on smoked cigarettes and not that much on smokeless. So is smokeless really an issue in our countries? E-cigarette prevalence, morbidity and mortality from tobacco use, and availability of cessation services. Andrea, next one. So when we asked them what were their challenges, again, the legend is there and the different colors show you how many people in each country said what. The top challenge seems to be tobacco industry interference. Then the next became lack of resources, which could be financial in terms of running tobacco control programs, or adequate personnel in terms of enforcement officers, researchers, and people just hired by government. And so very often when you look at the budgets that our governments are putting into tobacco control, there's very little money. In Kenya, you look at the tobacco control program, it's got about 10 staff for a country of 50 million. So there's just a sheer lack of boots on the ground. Then the second was the lack of relevant local data. And so in some areas, when we've tried checking, we can't get any locally done studies. The lack of political will, either to adopt policies or to enforce them once they are adopted. Issues of coordination between different government departments. So for example, health versus trade having different objectives, or sometimes tough wars between different agencies. Some other ministries, say like agriculture, that are felt not to be cooperative. And so coordination issues. Weak enforcement of existing laws, poor public awareness, and even lack of awareness among enforcement officers, and then taxation rates not up to the WHO standard. Next one, Andrea. So given the focus of this session is data and how we can work with what we have. So even though we kept on hearing we don't have enough data, I think one of the things we are finding is that it's a mixed bag. So there are areas where we don't have data, and then there are areas where we have data, but we cannot use it effectively. And so these are the things that the respondents said about their data issues. And so the first was, we do not have enough data. And so particularly with regard to prevalence, there could be prevalence surveys. These tend to be done every 5 years. So people felt these were not timely. So in some countries, the last survey is 2015, 2016, and we are now in 2021. So this data is outdated and then not adequately disaggregated. So we could have national prevalence statistics. If you come from a federal country, then at the federal level, they want to know what is the prevalence in my province or in my state or in my county. And very often we are not able to give them that. Sometimes data is not nationally representative. So say a country like Nigeria is so huge, so to do a national survey sometimes is not possible. So you get the GYTS was done in 3 states, yet Nigeria has got so many states. And so then you find some states just don't have data. Revenue agencies talked about lacking funding to regularly monitor illicit trade, no info on new products in the market. And so when you look at the GATS or the GYTS, they typically focus on smoked cigarettes, smokeless. We found it very hard to find information, for example, on e-cigarettes because they're not covered in these surveys. And then an interesting case came up in Nigeria where there's poor dissemination, and very often it's government agencies. So when we asked people for prevalence statistics and what they use in Nigeria, very few people mentioned the DHS. Yet there is a DHS 2018, which would have been the nearest data, and most of them were mentioning a GATS that was done, I think in 2012 or 2013. So we wondered how come new research came out in 2018, and very few of them seemed to have heard about it. And so it just tells us that as a research community, we are not doing very well at disseminating, and then inadequate info on youth prevalence. So there are some quotes here that we can use just to sample what people said. So we had one government official telling us, we don't know what products are coming into our country. Our data is 5 years old. The last GYTS only covered cigarettes and snuff, but not new products. One who said there's a gap with data relating to illicit trade. It's not generated consistently. We end up using industry data. And as a government, we do not have a budget to fund our own studies. So we are dependent on what other people tell us. And then that quote from a CSO in Nigeria. Next one, Andrea. The next data-related challenge was that even though some government agencies collect information, it is not analyzed, and therefore it is not useful. And so this was one quote around the DHIS. So the DHIS is the District Health Information System. And so in Kenya, for example, data is collected at hospitals and put into this huge database. So we all kept on hearing, we don't have information on morbidity and mortality from tobacco use, yet the government itself is routinely collecting this information. But because it just sits in this database and nobody analyzes it, then nobody can tell what to do with it. And so if you're going to try and link all these diseases to tobacco use and build a case that tobacco is causing problems in Kenya, what do you do when you've got raw data that's not analyzed and the government doesn't have the resources or the money to analyze it? There was the issue of long-term longitudinal studies when you're talking about assessing morbidity and mortality. We don't have those. So though we have the global burden of disease study, very often it's not done locally. And in some countries, people did not actually know where that information came from. And so for Kenya, they said we don't have Kenya-specific data on mortality. We would need to do longitudinal studies. And there were questions raised around how will we prove how much our government is spending? Next one, Andrea. The next challenge was inadequate information among the general public on health hazards of tobacco use, on tobacco growing. And this was a quote from Nigeria. Shisha is a huge issue for TC in Nigeria. And worse still is the fact that many people that use shisha don't know it's a tobacco product. And therefore they are falling prey to industry marketing. There were challenges around weak monitoring and evaluation systems within government. So government is not monitoring enforcement, is not monitoring disease burden, and then tax policies and their impact on price and prevalence is also not being monitored. So this was a comment from one country. We have had some success in tobacco taxation in March 2030. Now we need to monitor the retail prices over time to see whether the policy is having any impact. And then there's a lack of information on availability of cessation services. So we had this from both Kenya and Ethiopia. And basically many smokers are willing to quit, but don't know where to get help. And very often it's as simple as, do we have a map with all the facilities where somebody can go for cessation services? So if someone at the Ministry of Health doesn't know, how much more NGOs who are trying to encourage cessation, people just don't know where to go and get help. Next one. The next problem was reliance on data generated by the tobacco industry, especially for the areas of agriculture and illicit trade. And because it comes from the industry, this data is not reliable. So we had this from Kenya. The Ministry of Agriculture at national and county level treats tobacco as an unscheduled crop. This means it's not taken as a cash crop in Kenya, and therefore they do not collect any data on it, and we therefore rely on tobacco industry data. They give estimates which are not based on empirical data. We had this about illicit trade. If we had that data on illicit trade on a continuous and constant basis, we would have been able to interrogate whatever customs provided. But with inadequate information, we rely on industry data, which may not be reliable. Now, obviously, the tobacco industry pads the data to give their side of the story, which is why we can't rely on it. There was inadequate funding for research activities, and then some research areas do not have enough researchers. And so areas that were identified were economists, research on tobacco agriculture, research on tax, etc. And particularly a complaint from government, this was Ministry of Health. We have no internal economists or social scientists, so we have to get support from other ministries, which delays implementation. Next one. The other data challenge was inadequate information to counter tobacco industry misinformation or tobacco industry economic arguments against tobacco control policies. And so these were the quotes. We need more data to support industry interference. Though we have the Truth Tobacco industry documents, there is still a feeling that we do not have sufficient data in this area. Or the need to have data to inform advocacy for the increase of tobacco taxes. This was a government that was challenged at the National Assembly to defend provision of the regulations. And they complained that they were being told, you need to convince us that tobacco does this or that. And they felt that they didn't have enough to convince. And this came, I think, from Ethiopia. We need data on smoke-free environments, especially for airlines and hotels. That smoke-free policies will not result in economic losses for these industries, and we need local research on the economic impact of the smoke-free policies. Next one. So that was a quick summary of the different data challenges, and I'll hand over to Andrea to explain how we are going to do the breakouts.
Sure. So just looking at in terms of the numbers that we have, it looks like it actually might be easiest for us to stay in plenary. So we will kind of be discussing and having a group discussion, together. So I'll go ahead and go over some quick discussion guidelines. This is just something that we like to show and make sure we're on the same page about when we're in an open forum. These are pretty common sense, but just reviewing. So listen actively, respect others when they are speaking. Don't be afraid to respectfully challenge one another by asking questions, but refrain from personal attacks, but rather focus on ideas. Prioritize the discussion topic at hand. Participate to the fullest of your ability. Community growth depends on the inclusion of every individual voice. And the goal is not to agree, it's actually to gain a deeper understanding. So it's okay if we, don't see eye to eye with everyone here. So with that out there, I'd like to move to our discussion points. So the first discussion point here is, what challenges do you face in accessing and using data while adopting and implementing tobacco control measures in your country? And you can speak to kind of any data related challenge, information related challenge, research related challenge that you're facing. And then we'll leave some time for each of us to share, and then we'll move into how can these challenges be solved? And if you wanted to share, some information either that pertains to what you've experienced in your context or that you've seen in other countries or other examples, that's also more than welcome. So with that, I'll open the floor. Just as a reminder, if you joined us after the introduction, we encourage you to join via the Zoom link rather than the Whova app. That will ensure that you have the ability to mute and unmute yourself.
Andrea, if they want to speak, do you just want them to unmute?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's try it that way. So just feel free to take yourself off mute if you want to share. And of course, if you're not able to unmute, you can always use the chat. Oh, sorry to hear that, Corné, about the blackouts. So anyone want to add anything? Rachel, do you want us one thing that we can do is show the website and that we've been working on, and then we can come back to see if anyone has reactions. Does that sound all right? Okay, let's do that. So I will go ahead and share the website that we've been developing. So this is the South Africa website. And as a reminder, it is a live website. So it is publicly available. I'm going to go ahead and click on it. So if you have not yet seen this website, I definitely encourage you to check it out. So the way you can access it is southafrica.tobaccocontroldata.org. You can also just type in tobaccocontroldata.org and you will be sent to this screen. So here you have kind of one presentation of how we can display data and kind of priority information. This does not mean that every single country that we develop a website for will have the same exact format, but just to give you an example of what we've built for South Africa. So here at the beginning banner, you have kind of news stories or other information that is, coming in and that's new. So for example, we have 42 billion Rand in tobacco-related illness costs are equal to 197,000 Rand, which is annual salary for 215,000 teachers in 2016. In other words, you could pay 215,000 teachers that annual salary for the same amount that is you're currently spending in tobacco-related illness costs. We also have information about the 2020 sales ban, as well as information about our upcoming TCDI survey on e-cigarettes. We then have this preview here, which talks about 6 different themes. So these themes are, what we've heard in our workshop, as well as in the assessments about different areas or different categories of research and information that individuals wanted to access. So here we have tobacco prevalence, illicit trade, health burden, impact of existing and future policies, e-cigarettes, and tobacco agriculture. So in a little bit, for example, I can jump into any of these sections and we can explore them. We also have fact page key insights. So here you see, this is a fact from each page, right? So this is kind of, even if you just stayed on the home page, you would be able to get a snippet of information that's included in more detail in the website later on. So we have information related to the prevalence of smoking. 19% of South Africans smoked cigarettes in 2017. We have information on illicit trade, health insights, agriculture, e-cigarette, and impact of policy. So that is, our home page. We here acknowledge our partners, as well as have an opportunity for you to enter your email, and that will help you stay informed and stay up to date about new information that's released. So for example, if we were to jump into health burden, we have like 2 key facts, and this is fairly consistent across each website page, but we have 2 takeaway facts that are available at the beginning. So this, referred to obviously health impacts. The second point, the tobacco industry is promoting e-cigarettes as a healthy alternative, but the long-term health impacts are still unknown. And we actually have an e-cigarettes page where you can dive in for more. We have a section on the range of non-communicable diseases that are caused by tobacco use. And as you can see here, we can build interactive features that show or that respond to where your mouse is, and that can release more information. We have information of the annual deaths caused by smoking in South Africa, as well as a section on treatment costs. So as I mentioned, this is something that came up frequently in the assessment interviews of information that is needed, right? Not just to talk about health impacts, but to talk about economic impacts as well, particularly when the tobacco industry does use economic reasoning to try to promote kind of more lax regulation or to fight against an increase in excise taxes. We also have a section on secondhand smoke. And as you can see here, this is something that we have for many of our pages, but we actually have a myths and facts section. And this again was something that we heard repeatedly in terms of there's constant narratives, or you hear the same arguments over and over, and it's really important to call those out as, these aren't accurate. And so we have here, for example, the fake information is that a small amount of exposure to secondhand smoke is harmless. And the fact is that there is no risk-free level of exposure to secondhand smoke. Exposure to secondhand smoke can cause sudden blood clots and heart attacks, and strokes can also be triggered by secondhand tobacco smoke. Brief exposure can trigger asthma attacks in children. So we have a few more, of these examples of myths and facts. And then finally, we have a section on tobacco agriculture and its impact on health. as well as symptoms associated with it, and another section on myth and fact. And then here we kind of combat the idea that e-cigarettes are harmless because, as we know, there are health impacts. So I think that gives a really good overview of some of our pages. Again, you can take time on your own to review these, to understand, what are the impacts of different policies, for example, to read these infographics and to go into more detail. But as you can see, there's a lot of opportunities to dive deep. And the hope for this website is that it will complement work that's already being done. So for example, if you're preparing for a meeting with the Ministry of Health, that you have this information easily available. Everything is referenced. So you're able to see, where the study is that we're quoting. You're able to link to those directly. And the hope is that this will, be a resource for you and for others in the tobacco control community. So I don't know if you can see my cat, but she says hello. She's also a tobacco control advocate. So with that, I think we've, kind of shown you a little bit of what we can do on the tech side and how we work. And I'll leave it open for questions or comments. Again, you're welcome to take yourself off mute or to write in the chat.
I think I'll just add that, so we are going through this process for another 5 countries. So this is just a South African website. Each of our project countries will have their own site. So we are currently working on Kenya, on Nigeria, on Ethiopia, and we'll also be working on DRC and Zambia. So each of them will have their own page, and the topics will depend on what the stakeholders raised as their priority. So there are some that are likely to show up on every country's page, for example, prevalence, and then some will not show up. So issues like agriculture may not show up everywhere, especially if it's not a big problem in country. So watch this space, and as each country's site is finished, it will then be launched. Do we have any questions or comments?
Hi, Rachel. This is Susan. Hi. I work for the ITC project. You know me. And thank you very much for the presentation and just also the great work that you're doing, because what you're doing is really true. There's a lot of lack of, I would say, appropriate data that is required in especially the African countries, so that they can be able to use it either whether it's for advocacy, whether it's for policy, whatever it is. And so I really, this is really exciting. The question I wanted to ask is, okay, I'm still trying to understand. This is my first time to hear about DG. So I still getting to understand what you do. But I think my understanding is that you're trying to provide the data, or you're actually doing a needs assessment, going to countries, finding out what they need. And then you're looking for ways, whether through secondary data or primary data, to provide that. And then you put it in the website so that they can go back and access. So I don't know, am I getting it correct? Okay, so as you know, the ITC project do longitudinal studies in, of course, Kenya, in 29 countries, and especially in the African region, we're in 3 countries, that's Kenya, Zambia, and Mauritius. And I just wanted to know that, because I know part of it is dissemination, I think, as clearly, I think as Andrea said, sometimes it's not that information is not there, but then the people who need it are not getting the information that's out there. So I see that this is probably an opportunity also for us to be able to add maybe information so that you can be able to put it in your website, and you can point people to the information that probably, maybe some of your needs assessment, raise some answers that we could probably be able to answer through the ITC project. So the question, I'm going round and round, but I think the question is, how do we link up with you? And also because, like, of course, like the ITC project, sometimes we do the surveys based on funding. So like, for example, we've done 2 waves in Kenya. We did in 2012 and then we did in 2018. So of course, as Rachel clearly said, there's a gap, like we haven't been able to do, we haven't done beyond 2018 because, of course, of limited funds and other issues. Yeah, so I just want to know first, how can we be able to contribute to your site? And then also, yeah, I'm really excited to see what is in your site to be able to, because maybe some of the questions we have, you could answer it through your site. So I think I'll stop there, but thank you.
Yeah,
Andre, I had seen Susie's hand, so maybe we also take Susie's, then we respond to the two of them.
that's perfect. Thank you.
Susie?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea, Rachel. I think this is a great initiative. And I would like really to congratulate DG team for the good work that you are doing. Because I think one of the first challenge I've seen based on my experience, not in one country, but based on my interactions with different civil society organizations that we are supporting in our tobacco control program, is that they don't know where to go to find reliable data. Then the other challenge is how to translate those data into advocacy messages, how to move from data to action, how to change the numbers into a good and catchy advocacy message that you can share with policymakers to make them move in the right direction. So I think this idea of having like a dedicated website for each country is really something good, and we are looking forward to having more. Mine was not a question. Thank you.
Sorry, can you introduce yourself, Susie? So for the rest of us who don't already know you.
Okay, I'm Susie Limbepe. I'm working with the Tobacco Control Program at the African Capacity Building Foundation based in Harare.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And thank you, Susan and Susie. Those are excellent comments, and we really appreciate it. So I'll go ahead and kind of share an initial reaction. Then Rachel, I'll pass it to you if that sounds good. Great. So Susan, thank you so much for bringing up the point about, you know, highlighting research. And absolutely, I think that's one of the areas where we can help, you know, for those of you who are directly involved in research or who are maybe interested in conducting future research, you know, we can share what we gathered or like the data needs, for example, so that you have ideas on, okay, this is very clearly the data needs. And also we can showcase your work. So as you mentioned, this is a place where we continue to want to update and to add information. And we've done a kind of a literature scan, and we kind of continue to do literature scans, but we might not, you know, have everything. And so we want to make sure that your organization's research or your project's research is included and visible. So there's two ways to go about it. The official way is I just sent in the chat the URL to the South Africa Tobacco Control Data page, and specifically the About page. So if you'll notice, there is a section at the end called Showcase Your Work. I'll go ahead and share my screen so that you can see it. So as I mentioned, here I am in the About page. Here's the problem and solution, you know, a little bit about the theory of change, but here's Showcase Your Work. So you're able to, you know, just fill out this form and directly, you know, link to upload a file or, you know, PDF, whatever you would like to share. And that gets sent directly to the TCDI team. So that's one major way where I would definitely encourage you to use that. If you see information that you would like to share and get showcased. The other option is, of course, you're more than welcome to reach out to me directly. I just put my email in the chat, and I'm happy to, you know, we can have a broader conversation about, you know, your insights and kind of more specifically what you'd like to see. So those are your two options, I would say, for showcasing your work. And I do think in terms of sharing the data needs, we are right now working on editing a white paper that will be public that includes, you know, more information based on what Rachel shared earlier in the presentation. So for example, it goes into detail specifically about data challenges and why. And so I think especially if you work in the research space, that's going to be really interesting to read about. Right now, though, it's still in the draft stage, but I will say, you know, especially if you email me and have specific questions, I'm more than happy to share and answer those questions for you. So I'll stop talking there. Rachel, do you have anything to add to either Susan or Susie's questions and comments?
So turning to Susie's from ACBF, I acknowledge that very often there's the challenge in, so data is available, how do we translate it into what can be used to get action? And so we, on one hand, hope that people can be able to craft their own materials from our site. So if, for example, I don't know if, Andrea, you could show the prevalence page. So you can see if you go down, there are some charts there. And so technically you should be able, like, you know, if you needed to put together a quick presentation for your minister, you could be able to print out that page. You could be able to come in here and see, I would like this section, and, you know, help you to put together your own materials. So unfortunately, we don't go to the level of training you on advocacy. We are hoping other civil society organizations can do that. But at least what we are trying to help people with is they don't have to wade through the prevalence statistics for their country. Everything is here. So if you look at our reference page, it has got 20 references, which tobacco control advocate has got time to read 20 research documents to come up with 3 paragraphs for their minister. So TCDI has done it for you. So we've summarized all of those 20 sources. We've checked them. We have a very rigorous process where there are multiple reviewers. And so subject matter experts from that country, then again, another review from UCT. So you can bank on our information. It is solid, it is good. And this is a contribution that we are trying to make to the community. So it's unfortunate that so far we'll only be able to do this for 6 countries, but hopefully it will be helpful for the advocates in those 6 countries. And again, Susan, I would also encourage, so reach out to Andrea. I think you also know where to find me, and I know where to find you. And nothing stops us from having a DG ITC conversation. So Zambia indeed is one of our project countries. So it would be really great to know what ITC Zambia came up with. And maybe then also to add that we do a little bit of primary data collection in each of our project countries, and they get to pick the topic. So for example, in South Africa, the topic is e-cigarettes. In Nigeria, it is shisha. In Kenya, it is morbidity and mortality from tobacco use. And we are still finalizing on the topic for Kenya. So we use largely secondary data, and then we do a bit of primary data collection. Do we have any other questions or comments? I can see Isa here. Before Susan, I give you another chance. What are you undertaking for Francophone Africa? Andrea?
Yeah, I was actually curious. Aminata, do you want to speak to what we're working on in Francophone Africa?
Yeah, sure. So DRC is part of the TCDI countries. So we have signed an MOU with the Ministry of Health this week, and we are yet to start implementation in DRC. So it's one of the TCDI country in the Francophone in Africa.
Sorry, Susan, you wanted to say something, or Andrea, you had a response to that before?
Yeah, just to add to that really quickly. So as you mentioned, Rachel, we currently have scope for 6 countries, but I know there's individuals from Uganda on the call, Burkina Faso. If you see this as helpful for you in your country context, please let us know. I mean, it's really helpful to hear that there's demand for this, and that helps us argue for, you know, we need to be doing this for additional countries. As kind commented Susie, she was like, we need this everywhere. So if you have that feedback, that's really helpful for us to hear. So don't think that just because we haven't mentioned your country name yet, that's 100% means that we can't do it. There's still possibility further down the road. So anyway, yes, Susan.
Yeah, so and you could please correct me because I'm still understanding what TCDI are doing. And I think it's really exciting and congratulations for that. The question I ask is that, so I think, Rachel, you did mention that now I think you're developing questions for Kenya. I just wanted to know, like, especially because I'm thinking about synergy, like maybe it would be great. I mean, it's nice. One of the problems is sometimes in Africa, we are sort of, everybody is in their silo and probably repeating the same thing, rerunning the wheel. And sometimes you're thinking, how is it that we could be able to do stuff that we can be able to work together, help each other? So one of that leads to my question, like, where do you how do you design your questions? Are they like validated questions, or are they just or are they questions that you develop based on maybe what's there? And the question I'm asking, sometimes if you may be wanting to ask questions that probably are similar to some of the questions, and the advantage of sometimes that is that we can, sometimes it's good we can use, because maybe like we're in Kenya 2018, we may not be there in 2021, and sometimes you sort of want to compare your findings with what other people are doing. So one of them is where your questions come from. The other one is that I wanted to know, like, the scope of your sample, like, is it a nationally representative sample, or are you just or are you doing based on the need and of that particular country? Yeah, so just that, I just want to understand more. Thank you.
So just because I know what ITC does, so the Kenyan website is largely going to be built around secondary data. So the only primary data we'll be collecting is going to be on morbidity and mortality from tobacco use. So in that sense, then, so we have a research team composed of people from the Ministry of Health and the Kenya Medical Research Institute, and it's a hospital-based kind of survey where we then talk to patients who suffer from diseases that are caused by tobacco use. So the sample is mixed of patients who've got cancers attributable to tobacco use, COPD, tuberculosis, stroke, and there's about 6 disease conditions that have a very strong causal link to tobacco use. So the questions that then they'll be being asked are, one, are you a smoker? If you are, then we'll go into a bit of their tobacco use. How much do they smoke? If they've ever tried cessation, what products they were using, how long they have used them for. And then the other half is, so then what is the impact of this smoking on your disease? So how many days do you lose by coming to the hospital? How has it affected your employment? How has it affected your household income? How much do you spend on getting treated? So it's not a prevalence survey per se, it's more around the impact of tobacco use in the country. So for prevalence, because I know ITC is both a bit of a prevalence survey, and then it's also evaluating the impact of the policies, then for that in Kenya, we would use secondary data. So we would use like the GATS or the DHS, and we would use data that other people have used. So at least on prevalence, we are not collecting our own. And I doubt there's really no country where we are doing prevalence because it's really expensive. I think it would be way beyond us. Yeah, so for most prevalence, we use national surveys. So we use the GATS, we use the KDHS, we use the GYTS. And if there's any other entity, so for example, in South Africa, they do their own national survey, then we do that. And so the survey sizes would be determined by their national agency. So I know for both GATS, KDHS, they have a very robust sampling methodology. I don't know if I've answered your question, Susan.
Yes, you have, and just one more question. Yeah, so thank you. Yes, I know it's prevalence and all that, and that's also partly that's like in ITC we can't always be do it continuously. They're very expensive. I think the other question I had is that because you're doing these studies in different countries, what I was thinking is that do you sort of try to have similar questions for the different countries so that your countries you're able to compare with them, like you're able to compare. Like if, for example, you had the same question, needs assessment, and the same question in another country, like maybe what Kenya is asking is the same as South Africa, would you sort of try to make the question similar just so that you can be able to compare both countries? So I'm just thinking beyond just answering Kenya, just being able to do comparative studies. So I think then I'll stop.
Sure, that's a great point. I can speak to that. And I also see Susie's question in the chat, which I think are somewhat related. So we focus very much on kind of each country context is its own project is it's like kind of an independent branch of TCDI. So in other words, we initially thought, oh, this will be great. We'll have like core research questions that will be shared across country. And what we've discovered as we've had, especially the validation workshops in country, that there's like very unique needs that differ. So as you can see, you know, illicit trade research was much more heavily prioritized or expresses a need in Ethiopia than in Nigeria comparatively. And so we saw, you know, Nigeria had a focus on shisha prevalence, where we didn't hear that in the other countries that we interviewed. So what we've found so far is we've taken each country as a case-by-case basis, and that has shown us that there hasn't been an overlap as of yet in the core research questions. I think if there were overlap, 100% that we would want to reuse or have a similar core set of questions that we could do comparison. But right now, our initial thought about doing a core data model isn't really being backed up by what we're hearing. And then to Susie's point, there are differences in research needs, you know, by different sectors, as you mentioned, between government representatives, civil society, also between academia. You know, I'm curious if others like Sembe, you know, have an example, or Rachel, that they can think of off the top of their head. But I will say what we try to do is we do breakout sessions where each person can kind of argue why they think their data need is important and why, and that we give space for that. And then people come together and they vote. And as I remember, every single country we've done, it's majority wins. So every person has one vote. And so there is a lot of like passionate debating, you know, in the time leading up to it, but it does kind of lead to that final vote. And so far we haven't had, it ends up kind of leaning towards one consensus. So I'll pause there if others want to jump into that or share more.
Maybe Sembe, from the Nigerian perspective, what were the differences? What were the government priorities and the CSO ones? Because there are those differences.
Yeah, sure. You guys are right. There are those differences. And I think for us in Nigeria, what we did see was more because again, we know that the civil society pretty much drives the tobacco control advocacy space in Nigeria. So their voices are usually the loudest. And so you tend to hear them pushing more for the research because they're the ones who need it for the work that they do. And government is basically just, you know, sort of chilling and waiting to be educated, if that's the word. And so what we did see was civil society organizations were focused more so on the data that backs up prevalence rates, especially with shisha use, which is a new problem, so to speak, in Nigeria, because we have no regulation on this, and we also don't have any national data on it. And so shisha was a big thing that civil society organizations wanted to see the research for. But when you flip it on the government side, they were more interested in more of the arguments, so to speak, around taxation and what that meant for them in terms of the ballpark figure, if that makes sense. So that's the kind of disparity that we saw for Nigeria, but it's largely driven more by the civil society organizations. And like Andrea was saying, when it came down to the votes, that always takes precedence because, again, these are the people that do the work more so than the government in Nigeria.
Well, I think unfortunately we are at time, but thank you all so much for joining, you know, for listening, participating, for your ideas and thoughts. We continue to be very open for feedback or ideas or other research, as we mentioned. So Rachel, I'll pass it to you if you're to close us out, unless there's any other questions.
Yeah, so as I said, we currently have the South Africa site active, and in the next 1 to 2 years, the other countries will have joined, and that is Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia, DRC, and Zambia. And as Andrea said, if you really would like us to do this for your country, write in and let us know so that we can appeal to those that fund us and show the need for this in other countries. Feel free to contact us either through the website or through Andrea's email address. And it's been really great having you. Have a good rest of afternoon and rest of the conference.
Great, and please follow us on Twitter. It's at TCDI Africa. So I just put that link in there, and I'm going to put the link of the TCDI website one more time in the chat. But thank you all so much.
Thank you so much too.
Thank you, everyone.